Hanukkah is one of the most well-known Jewish holidays today, and mainly because of its proximity to Christmas. Well, despite what many may believe, it is not really a Jewish version of Christmas. The Hanukkah story predates the Christmas story by more than 150 years. Instead of a manger, wise men, King Herod, and baby Jesus, Hanukkah is about the temple, the Greeks, a cruel tyrant, and God's preservation of his people in the face of Greek persecution and influence. If you happen to be reading Leviticus 23 in hopes of finding Hanukkah among other Jewish feast days, such as Passover, you will not find it listed among them. And this is because its historical origins take place during the 400-year period between the Old and the New Testaments. You might be surprised, however, to hear that Hanukkah is referenced in the New Testament. Now, before you worry yourself for having never noticed the word Hanukkah in your devotions, you should know that the holiday goes by two other titles: the Feast of Dedication and the Festival of Lights. In the middle of John 10, Jesus is seen walking in the temple at the time of the Feast of Dedication. So why dedication? Why lights? Well, for this, let's dive into some history. When Alexander the Great, the famed Greek king and a student of Aristotle, conquered Israel, the Jewish people began to acculturate into Hellenism, the Greek way of life. They blended in Greek influence, Greek customs and dress and even language, and in some instances adopted Greek styles of worship. So there was a tension between the Israelites who adopted Greek ways and those who wanted to maintain strict observance to the Torah, and everything in between. Hellenism brought strong benefits like citizenship, democracy, and a universal language. However, the Torah commanded Jewish people to teach their children the ways of God and to worship Him alone. Knowing the Greek language in order to live and trade is one thing, but to worship Greek gods and to allow Greek style of worship is something else entirely. So when 100 years later, a new ruler, Antiochus IV, puts a Hellenistic priest in the sacred Jewish temple and forces the sacrifice of pigs on the holy altar, revolt breaks loose. A small group of Jewish people led by Mattathias the Hasmonean and his son Judah led a guerrilla warfare strategy against Antiochus's well-armed troops and miraculously won. These Hasmoneans quite literally drove out the foreigners from their land and removed Greek pagan influences from their worship, which centered around the temple. So in 164 BC, the Maccabees cleansed the defiled temple and rededicated it back to the God of Israel on the 25th day of the Jewish month of Kislev. No Jewish victory passes without commemorating it with food. So every year since, the Jewish people have celebrated this rededication with a feast. That's why the holiday is called the Feast of Dedication, because the temple was cleansed and rededicated to the Lord. But why do we call Hanukkah the Festival of Lights? For this, we shall look to what happened during the cleansing of the temple. As the story goes, one small jar of oil belonging to the high priest miraculously kept the fire burning on the menorah for 8 whole days. Now, it has become custom to celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days and to light one of the 8 candles each night on a special Hanukkah candle holder. There is something fascinating about the New Testament's mention of Hanukkah and the history we just discussed. It is in the middle of chapter 10 that John references this holiday. And interestingly, what comes right before its mention is Jesus' discussion of the Good Shepherd who enters the sheepfold through the gate versus the hired hand who comes in another way and is identified by Jesus as a thief and a robber who cares not for the sheep. It is likely that Jesus is comparing his own priestly legitimacy to the Sadducees who had priestly charge of the temple at that time. These Sadducees were the successors of the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans who got carried away in their temple cleansing and ended up usurping the biblical priestly line of Zadok. In John 10, Jesus defines the true priestly role of the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, while the hired hand runs away and leaves the sheep when he sees the wolf coming. When the forces of Rome captured Israel, history shows it was the Sadducees who compromised and negotiated with harsh Roman rule, all at the expense of serving the sheep. While Jesus preserves the spirit and the history of Hanukkah, he also preserves God's firm and unchanging definition of the role of priesthood, one who lays down his life for the sheep in accordance with the suffering servant prophecies of Isaiah 53. As believers of Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, the spirit of Hanukkah carries over to us today. Not only can we engage in the spiritual practice of rededicating ourselves and our body and our minds and spirit to the Lord, but we can also acknowledge a greater truth. Jesus is our great high priest, the light of the world, and the true and good shepherd who cares for his sheep. He laid down his life for us all, washing us and cleansing us from sin and reclaiming us for all eternity, which is the ultimate message of the season. Happy Hanukkah.